Star Trek IV The Voyage Home is probably the most offbeat and unusual Star Trek movies in the whole franchise. It takes place directly after Star Trek III The Search for Spock, and continues some of the themes from the previous two films, leading many fans to refer to The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home as a trilogy. The film is once again directed by Leonard Nimoy, who after turning in an excellent and profitable product with the last film, was given free rein to do whatever he wanted for the next one. Oddly enough, there was a cast problem, however. You might have remembered that Leonard Nimoy did not want to do Star Trek II and wound up accepting the movie because they promised that he'd get to do a death scene. So he figured it was the last one that he was going to do. But then he decided he wanted to do Star Trek III and not only do it but direct it. And then he did. Well, with Star Trek IV, William Shatner was reluctant to come back. They wound up having to promise him that he could direct the next film, so after two films directed by Spock, you get one directed by Kirk. But of course I'll talk about that one in the next review. With The Voyage Home, Nimoy had a creative blank check, and he decided to do a movie with an environmental message. Yeah, it was the 80s all right. As with the last film, you get a recap of the events that took place prior, and then a dedication to the crew of the Challenger, a space shuttle that had tragically exploded not too long before the film's release. I remember when I saw the film, even though I was seeing it on TV, the Challenger was still fresh in a lot of people's heads, so that was pretty nice of them. Anyway, it's been a few months, and Kirk, Spock, Scotty, Chekhov, Uhura, Bones, Sulu, and Savick have been on Vulcan, repairing the Klingon ship that was captured from Krug in the last movie. No mention is made of Maltz, the one Klingon that survived. Differing Star Trek fiction has both claimed that he killed himself and that he became a Federation prisoner, though I don't think that makes too much sense. Spock is also re-educating himself, though he has difficulty with emotions, as his education is Vulcan and he has a hard time getting in touch with his human side. His mother comes and gives him a pep talk about this, but it's throughout the film that he rediscovers feelings of friendship. The crew decides to head back to Earth to face the music, the criminal charges that they face for stealing the Enterprise. Back on Earth, they're already having a preliminary hearing when a Klingon ambassador is demanding Kirk be extradited to the Klingon Empire for execution. Sarek shows up to talk sense into everybody, and the Klingon claims that there can be no peace while Kirk lives. I never really saw the point in this scene. It's not picked up in this movie, and it's kind of minimally touched on in the next movie, but whatever. Another thing that bugged me about this is how a lot of people like to criticize The Search for Spock for the scene in which the Enterprise security tapes are shown, and it's basically footage from The Wrath of Khan. People like to say, well, why do the ship's cameras always get the perfect angles? You know, I can accept that, but the tape they show in The Voyage Home is ridiculous. It has footage from inside the Enterprise, which was destroyed, inside from Krug's ship, which is on Vulcan at the time, and even the exterior shot of the Enterprise exploding. What, do the Klingons have cameras hanging in space? Most illogical. Anyway, an alien probe shows up heading for Earth, disabling anything in its path. Before you can ask if the V'ger is back, this one looks more like a big log of duty. This giant fecal matter is letting off a strange sound that no one can decipher. As Kirk's ship nears Earth, they get a message from the President of the Federation warning everyone away. Spock hears the sounds and says they might not be intended for humans, and he makes note that they're being aimed at the ocean. Uhura does some shit that shows what the sound would sound like from underwater, and it sounds like whales. Spock figures that only humpback whales could answer, and they're extinct. So it's time travel then. The crew use a slingshot around the sun thing to return to the late 20th century, essentially the 80s. Too bad Savick stayed on Vulcan. She already had the 80s hair. She could have fit right in. Anyway, now the crew of the Klingon ship, which they have named the Bounty, have to find some whales to bring them back and blend in with people from San Francisco in the 80s. Scotty and Bones go off to find a big-ass tank to hold the whales. Sulu flies a helicopter to bring the ship back to where they parked. Chekhov and Uhura go after some uranium so they have enough power to get back, and Kirk and Spock go to try to find whales. They could go to open sea, but there are two in captivity. Problem is they're said to be released, and Kirk needs the radio frequency of their tags before a bunch of evil whalers gets hold of them and makes millions of small children cry. If you're thinking the whole thing is a bit preachy, you're right. It's at this point that the film becomes a comedy, and nothing at all like Star Trek. Spock gets most of the comedic moments, like jumping into a tank to mind meld with the whales, not liking Italian food, and not knowing what exact change is. There's other ridiculous stuff, like McCoy curing a woman's dialysis, Scotty attempting to talk to a computer, and of course the marine biologist running straight into the cloaked ship. Can't have a comedy without slapstick, right? The only parts that I found genuinely funny was Spock attempting to curse. He's really bad at it, but he tries so hard. Basically, he just says the hell into the middle of every sentence. The dumbest part, the hell by far, was the escape from the hospital. It's like something the hell out of Benny Hill, complete with the doofy music. Okay, I'll stop doing that now. Eventually, they get everything they need and return home. This space shit has its conversations with the whale, and the crew is exonerated, all except for Kirk, who gets busted down to captain, which is where he belongs. Sulu hopes that they'll get assigned to a new ship, like the Excelsior, which is ironic, he does eventually captain that ship, but in the end you get a small glimpse of the new Enterprise, brand new and designated the hell with a letter A. Okay, I lied. Star Trek IV was a massive success and made more money than any other Trek movie up until the new reboot. Its success led to the creation of Star Trek The Next Generation, and as a matter of fact, early VHS versions of the film had a preview of that show on it. It also got rave reviews, and I think that's mostly due to the fact that it's so unlike Star Trek. It's very accessible despite it being the third part of an unofficial trilogy, and seeing the crew interact with modern-day people made it easier for people to go check it out, not to mention that it's a comedy and people like to laugh. Personally, I find it to be a disappointment after the last two movies were so brilliant. There's another one of those situations where I call bullshit on the even-numbered films being superior to the odd-numbered films, because after Star Trek III, 4 just seems silly in comparison. It's not bad, it is genuinely entertaining, but the reliance on jokes and a dippy score really bugs me, and I never like the overly preachy environmentalist message. I guess that most people like their science fiction films to be all about environmentalism. Just look at Avatar, but not me. I don't need to sit there watching a movie to be told how I better shape up or the future's gonna suck ass. I used to get enough of that when I was in school. I go to movies to be entertained, and yeah, I guess it was entertaining, but in a way that's so far detached from Star Trek that it doesn't settle the right way with me. There's also some really weird shit, like when they go back in time, there's all these giant CGI heads. What is that about? Well, basically, Star Trek IV is one of those that I can't agree with the general consensus. It's not bad, and it's certainly not the worst Star Trek movie, but it is by no means a favorite of mine. I'll give it a 6 out of a possible 10.